So if we are going to study the 5 forces, let's start with the first. And the first is the current competition, the degree of rivalry of current competition. So in order to determine it, we have to study something we are going to call structural factors, okay? And yes, I know there are many of them, but it's more or less easy to understand them. And if you think about them, it's more or less easy to have them in mind. So first of all, the degree of concentration, the number, the size, and the balance between the competitors in an industry. If there are just a few big ones, well, it's an oligopoly. If there's just one, it's a monopoly. Okay. On the other hand, if there are many small ones, it's closer to perfect competition. That's it. So if the concentration in an industry is high, I mean a few big fishes, okay, the industry is attractive. If the concentration in an industry is low, I mean, if an industry is fragmented, there are many small firms, we are under close to perfect competition and the industry is less attractive. The growth, well, this is clear. Obviously, if an industry is growing, okay, this increases the size of the markets. There are going to be more and more customers. If there are more and more customers, if you want to increase your sales, you don't need to detract customers from any other companies. You don't need to fight for new customers because new customers are coming to the industry. So the competitive pressure is going to be lower if an industry is growing. If an industry is not growing, or even if an industry is decreasing, okay, if we are in the decline stage of the product life cycle, the problem is that whenever you want a new customer, you have to take it from another company. And that's a very important problem. We will increase the competitive pressure. Okay, so if an industry is growing, clearly growing, less competitive pressure, more attractiveness. If an industry is decreasing, declining, okay, there's more competitive pressure, less attractiveness. The opportunities for differentiation. Look, which is the main difference between perfect competition and monopolistic competition? Just the difference of the product. In perfect competition, the products offered by all the companies are considered to be the same. Under monopolistic competition, the products offered are different. And monopolistic competition is clearly more attractive. Okay, as I told you, you don't go to a bar. You do go to your favorite bar because it's differentiated. You perceive it to be different. Okay, so if the product is a commodity, is undifferentiated, then the industry is less attractive. If the product can be differentiated, then the industry is going to be more attractive. Think about bread. When I was a child, well, you wasn't there, okay? But when I was a child, when you wanted to buy bread, you went to the baker and you said, okay, I want 2 loaves of bread. That's it, 2 loaves. That's it. And now when you go to the baker to buy bread, you have got a full catalog of different breads with different cereals and so on. Well, this increases the attractiveness of the industry. This gives the baker more more possibilities of profitability. Then we have got the cost structure. The cost structure, look, if there's a majority of fixed costs, you need to produce a lot in order to reduce the unitary cost. If there's a majority of variable cost, you can reduce the unitary cost, you just produce a little less. So the problem is that when fixed costs are relevant, you are obliged to produce a lot. If you are obliged to produce a lot, and your competitors are obliged to produce a lot too, okay, then you are going to put a lot of units of the product in the market. So the competition is going to be fierce. If you can reduce or change the amount of units produced, modifying variable costs, then it's going to be easier. If you feel that the market is, well, smaller today, well, you reduce the amount of units produced, reducing your variable costs. So if the costs are mainly fixed, okay, then the industry is going to be less attractive. If the costs are mainly variable, then the industry is going to be more attractive. Overcapacity, this is related with growth. If the capacity of the industry, if an industry can produce more units than demanded, then there's a major problem. I mean, companies will fight fiercely against each other in order to sell the units. There's going to be more competition. On the other hand, if the capacity of an industry is lower than the demand, you're going to sell everything you have got. Anything you can produce, you are going to sell it. Okay, so the industry is going to be clearly attractive. If there's overcapacity, less attractiveness. If there's not overcapacity, more attractiveness. Okay, switching costs. Switching costs are a very interesting concept. Okay, a switching cost is the cost that any customer has to face, not to pay because it needn't be money. Okay, but a cost that any customer has to face in order to move from one supplier to another. For instance, you have got a mobile, you are working with a mobile phone company, let us say Movistar. What happens if you want to move to Orange? Okay, well, you tell Orange, they do it for you, but then Movistar calls you and you have got 1 day of interruption or some hours of interruption, normally in the night. So the cost is not high. Okay. On the other hand, what happens if you have got a mortgage loan with a bank and you want to move to another? Well, first of all, you have to cancel the first one, and then to open the other one, you have to go to the notary, you have to pay costs of the notary, you have to pay costs of the registry, you have to pay different costs, okay? And in this case, we are talking about paying money. So, it's frequent that when you are moving from one supplier to another one, you have to, first of all, sometimes pay money for it. Second, sometimes you have to learn how to work with the new supplier. It depends on the product, obviously, okay? Or you may have problems of compatibility. This happens when you move from, let us say, from iOS to Android, or vice versa. Okay, or sometimes you have to make a mental switch. You have been working for years with a company, now you are going to work with another, and the main cost you have to face is mental. You feel tied to the original company. Okay, so that's it. So these are switching costs. Okay, when there are switching costs, gaining a customer from a competitor is really difficult, or is more difficult. Okay, because, well, the customer has to face the switching costs. So competition is lower. Okay, when there are no switching costs, yogurts. Today you are buying a yogurt of Danone because you like it, and tomorrow you can be buying Hacendado because you like it. So changing from one yogurt brand to another has got no switching cost. Okay, this increases the competition. So the competitive pressure is higher when there are no switching costs. On the other hand, let me tell you that switching costs are something that customers somehow suffer. So customers don't like switching costs. I mean, well, some mental switching costs, you don't suffer them. You feel tight. You feel you like that supplier and so on. For instance, what I told you about your favorite restaurant and your favorite place. Maybe it's not the best place to go, but you feel tied to, and you're going to go on with going there. Okay, you are going to remain, but you don't feel that you are paying a cost. So no problem with that switching cost. On the other hand, in many cases, switching costs are a cost which is imposed to the customer, and the customer feels prisoner. So whenever the customer can leave, they do. Then we have got competitors' diversity. If the competitors of an industry are very different from each other, if they are very diverse, okay, they use different strategies, and this increases the competitive pressure, okay, because you don't know how you are going to be attacked, with which competitive variables. Then we have got the strategic interest. If an industry is very interesting from a strategic point of view, if an industry has got strategic interest, companies will not want to leave. If companies don't want to leave, they want to remain. And if they want to remain, they don't mind even losing money. So they are going to be competing more fiercely. Okay? If an industry hasn't got a strategic interest, it's easier that if you are not making money, you leave the industry. If you are not being profitable, you leave the industry. Finally, we have got two kinds of barriers which act in this first force. which are mobility barriers and exit barriers. Okay, mobility barriers. A mobility barrier is any mechanism which prevents a company from moving amongst different segments of the same industry. For instance, legal advisory. If you're a legal advisor about divorce processes, you are not normally playing part in criminal processes. Why? Because you are not specialized. You don't have the expertise. You don't have the knowledge. Okay, so in fact, you are not competing against all lawyers. You are just competing against the lawyers which are specialized in the same area as you are. This makes the industry smaller. Okay, so in fact, this reduces the competence. So this makes the industry more attractive. Mobility barriers make the industry more attractive. Then we have got exit barriers. Exit barriers are mechanisms which prevents from leaving an industry, from exiting an industry, even if you are not being profitable. Which kind of mechanisms? Well, first of all, there can be fixed exit costs, the cost you have to pay when you leave an industry. For instance, if you are going to dismiss the employees, you must pay an indemnization. And that's money. So if you want to leave, you know that you have to face this payment. Okay. Then we can have specialized assets, assets which are not useful at all in any other industry. Imagine that, let us say, Parque de Atracciones decides to close. Okay, what do they do with the roller coaster? Well, they can sell the iron, they can sell the steel, but they cannot sell the roller coaster as a roller coaster. Know what I mean? So these specialized assets are not useful in any other industry. What about nuclear plants? What do you do with a nuclear reactor? That cannot be used for anything else. Well, there's another concept called sunk costs. Sunk costs are costs you had when you studied and you are never going to recover it. Okay, costs about publicity to be well known when you studied your activity, costs about some investments you made. Okay, you're never going to recover them. Okay, they needn't be specialized assets. Publicity is not a specialized asset, but you're never going to recover that. Okay, there can be sometimes legal restrictions. Sometimes you cannot leave an industry even if you want to because of some legal clauses. Okay, and finally there can be emotional barriers, strategic ties, and so on. Emotional barriers means that you would leave, but for instance, you have always been part of the industry. It's a tradition, and in the end, you try not to leave. Okay, and also there can be strategic ties, relationship with some other businesses. So you don't want to leave that business because of the reputational impact, for instance, that you would have over the other businesses. So this happens in the case of Disneyland Paris. Disneyland Paris has been losing money all along the time since it was open. But on the other hand, how can you explain the people that you are closing Disneyland Paris? How can you explain Disney fans? Okay, so whenever there are exit barriers, even if companies want to leave the industry, they cannot do it easily. Okay, they have to remain. So if you have to remain inside an industry, you will try not to lose money. This will increase the competition and this will reduce the attractiveness of an industry. Okay, so this is the first force, and well, let's move to the other ones, to the second, the third, and so on.